Welcome back to the fourth video of this mini-series. In the previous videos, we introduced a framework where we talked about some very simple, commonsensical rules, applying which you can significantly enhance the quality of your portfolio and your long-term performance. So we talked about 4 qualitative rules, and in the previous video, we talked about 2 quantitative rules. We talked about debt and gross margins. In this video, we are going to talk about capital that goes into a business and the return the business generates using the capital. Now, every business needs capital, and the capital comes in form of equity, which is the money which the owners of the business put in, and also the debt which the business raises. Now, I have already mentioned that we like businesses that do not use too much debt to run the operations. So in our kind of businesses, most of the capital comes in form of equity. And of course, there are some other sources of funding. This capital, in turn, is used in running the operation. So the capital is deployed in, number one, the working capital that is used to run the operations, and then also the fixed assets like property, plant, equipment, maybe some intangible assets like software licenses, etc. Now, our preference is to own businesses which do not need too much capital to run. These are called the asset-light businesses. And we like businesses which can grow fast, but to support that growth, the business does not need to guzzle too much capital. And there are a couple of very easy ways to figure that out. Now, the first thing I would encourage you to look at is look at the earnings that the business generates over the last few years and compare that with the operating cash flow that the business generates. Now, as long as the growth in earnings has kept pace with the growth in operating cash flows, that's great. So if we see the earnings growth has been faster than the growth in operating cash flows, that means there's a red flag. It might happen that the business is requiring more and more working capital to support the revenue growth and the earnings growth. Maybe they are not collecting their receivables fast enough, or maybe they have to grow their inventory. So they need more and more inventory to grow their revenues. And the growth in inventory is faster than the growth in the revenues. Or maybe the business is losing its negotiating power with its suppliers. So the credit terms are getting worse and worse. So these are several reasons why, even though the business is growing its earnings, the operating cash flow may not be growing fast enough. And that's something we do not want. Now, the next thing that we need to ensure is we like businesses that generate a lot of free cash flow. So just growing operating cash flow is not enough. We also need the business to grow free cash flow. And what is free cash flow? Free cash flow is nothing but the cash which owners of the business can take out without affecting the earnings power of the business. So this is the cash which the owners can, decide to give out as dividend, or they can use this cash to go and acquire other companies, or maybe to do share buybacks. So taking out this cash does not affect the earnings of the business in any form. Now, if a business requires a lot of capital, if it's a capital heavy business, what happens is, even after generating a healthy operating cash flow, a large part of that cash flow needs to be reinvested in capital investments. So very little cash is left for the owners to take out. And there are a couple of parameters that basically consolidate all this information. And if we keep a close eye on those parameters, it will ensure that our businesses are in very good shape. One is the return on invested capital. So as the business is investing more and more capital into its operations, this figure tells us what is the return that investment is generating. And everything gets reflected in the ongoing return on equity of a business. So as long as a business is able to maintain a healthy return on invested capital and return on equity, we can be assured of a satisfactory long-term performance of this business. And the easiest way for us to go and find out the return on invested capital and the return on equity is to go to morningstar.com, and Morningstar publishes these figures. It's very easy to read. Now, the long-term performance of a shareholder depends on how well the business is reinvesting its earnings and what kind of return the business is generating on the reinvested earnings. So as long as a business is being able to maintain a decent return on invested capital and return on equity, we can be reasonably sure that the business is reinvesting well. And what is this decent figure? I typically look for a figure of at least 15%, both for the return on invested capital and the return on equity. If I can find businesses that are generating over 20% ROIC and ROE, that's fantastic. That's even better. So this kind of summarizes the various criteria that we use to do our selection of businesses. And once we follow these very simple, commonsensical rules, we can be reasonably confident that our long-term performance from our portfolio will be quite satisfactory. Now, are we going to be right every single time? No, that's not going to happen. And that's why we maintain a portfolio of businesses. So I personally maintain a fairly concentrated portfolio of 6 to 8 great businesses. So even if some of them do not work out, overall at a portfolio level, the returns are very satisfactory. And that is what we really look for. So I hope you enjoyed this mini series, and I hope you take some of these learnings and go and apply on your portfolio. So thank you very much for your time.